ConsenSys has grown a lot over the last few years since you founded it after founding Ethereum with Vitalik and a bunch of others. Almost 1,000 people employed across dozens of projects. And I think I want to start out, we're sort of halfway through 2018. What's on your mind? What are the projects that are most interesting to you today? What do you tell the audience as the top 2 or 3 that you're most focused on these days?
So it's like top 20 or 30. We're focused on a huge number of things. Our business partitions into 4 prongs of activity, essentially. Product, consulting, which is solution building and advisory work. We have an academy, so lots of education work. And capital markets-like activities, custody systems and exchange systems and token launches and venture investing, etc. On the product side of things, we are more focused on permissionless blockchain, permissionless Ethereum, but also have a lot of those activities that slide over into the permissioned realm and can be used by many of our consulting projects or get sold into different situations. So ultimately, what we care most about is building the decentralized World Wide Web. With structure, Ethereum, evolution of Ethereum, other kinds of systems like Ethereum for trusted transactions, automated agreements, smart software objects on a public blockchain infrastructure, permissionless blockchain infrastructure, but also many other protocols that you need to build the decentralized web, decentralized storage and bandwidth and heavy compute, and lots of those systems are live or coming live right now. Essentially, Ethereum is a protocol-based open platform, and we can build applications on it. Some of those applications can be protocol-based open platforms, like in the music industry or longitudinal healthcare or bounties networks or supply chain networks. And so we're building lots of those platforms. The nature of Web3 or the decentralized World Wide Web will see us with greater control over our personal information, over our identities, and see us with greater agency, economic, social, and political agency in different systems on these protocol-based open platforms. So I think that's the core stuff that we're most excited about.
Awesome, and that covers such an enormous amount of ground. Is there anything you don't do, or you've sort of fended off and said that's just not something we're interested in?
Yeah, sure. We have a huge number of projects contacting us to help them raise money. Token launches are great ways of constructing these protocol-based network business models, but we're not so interested in doing it to aid projects in raising money. We're interested in doing it because we see these things as great ways of employing incentivized mechanism design. Basically, we have lots of really smart token developers, software developers who can work with our own internal projects or work with external projects, define the goals of a system, one of these network business models, and define the rules of the system such that a whole bunch of different actors and different roles that participate on the system via tokenized mechanisms as sort of the business logic that holds a lot of this together. They can behave selfishly, and the system, if properly designed, can essentially achieve its goals. And so when people come to us and they have a project that we can map into that sort of architecture, basically, we're excited about that. And a great side effect is that you can sell a token if it's constructed properly using those sorts of mechanisms and marketed properly so that you're not selling it in excess quantities to investor types who are hoping to achieve some sort of gain by the agency of others. Then you've got a good, clean, non-investor, non-security token. And so we would say no to lots of pure fundraise projects.
Got it. And when you look at, obviously you started with a couple of people and now it's 1,000. How has ConsenSys adapted over time? How has it changed as an organization?
So we're as flat as we can be, as fluid and decentralized as we can be. We have lots of projects, and we do our best to construct those projects so that they have a very large amount of autonomy and moving towards greater amounts of autonomy. We certainly have bottlenecks, and we keep growing, we keep breaking old structures that used to work, and we've got a lot of people that are trying to figure out process by which we can continue to remain a loosely coupled organization, a mesh of projects and companies that share overarching goals, that communicate a lot, richly, fluidly, hopefully in real time, and that collaborate and interoperate. So we are building, each team is tasked with doing what's best for their project. But beyond that, we feel like we're building out a ConsenSys ecosystem. Beyond that, we feel like we're building out significant elements of the Ethereum ecosystem. Beyond that, we feel like we're building out the decentralization ecosystem.
That's great. And when you look at, we had a Judith Steiner this morning from Parity. There you go. And she was talking about, this Web3 sort of world, specifically around multi-chain. That she was really focused with Polkadot on how do you interoperate between different chains, whether it's Ethereum, other chains that might come up in the future. Will ConsenSys ever invest in a non-Ethereum chain?
Yeah, we do. So we have a lot of people that we brought into ConsenSys who have significant expertise with Fabric and soon maybe some other technologies. Can't talk about it right now. And we built some things in-house that are sort of experimental. We're in the very early phases of the decentralization ecosystem, so we need to explore the solution space very widely. And I think there will be a lot of interledger activity this year. I think we need that sort of thing to link various different kinds of protocols for different purposes, and we need it. We need to essentially phase one of the ecosystem sees all transactions being validated by all nodes on the system and everybody holding all the data. And, that to a first approximation, it's more sophisticated than that. Phase two sees us having this radically decentralized trust layer, layer one, which currently is Ethereum, and there aren't good candidates at this point to replace that. But layer two solutions and state channels and different side chains mechanisms, plasma and relay networks, et cetera, those are important for phase two. But I think we're going to see lots of different mechanisms linking into Ethereum as the trust layer. And we're working on some stuff. Early on, we built something, a guy named Joseph Chow, under the auspices of the foundation, and then at ConsenSys built something called BTC Relay, which enables a simple payment verification wallet on Ethereum in a smart contract to validate transactions on the Bitcoin network. We've done experiments with that architecture, and we're doing much more sophisticated experiments now.
Great. When you look at Ethereum, one of the issues has been regulation. And a few weeks ago, was one of our sister media publications, Yahoo, the director of corporate finance at the SEC, said that Ethereum was not a security. Do you think that is going to become true in sort of the long run in the SEC's analysis as well as overseas?
So Director Hinman declared Ether not a security. Do I think it's going to become true that Ether will remain not a security? Yeah, I think he was pretty definitive about that, they were careful not to say anything about the token launch, and we were careful to do our legal work before the token launch so that we're very comfortable that it never was a security. And their analysis was a little more subtle, I think, leaving them some room to police other systems. And so they focused on the decentralized nature of the ecosystem and said that right now Ether's not a security, and you're not gonna, Entropy's not gonna allow that system, I think, to become more centralized. So I doubt it will ever be a security. The ramifications of that are that you'll be able to keep trading Ether as we trade it right now. So the potential, if they declared it a security, the potential of enforcing much more rigid trading mechanisms on regulated exchanges could have been problematic for the ecosystem. But we're officially beyond that. We felt we were beyond that right from the start. The really interesting thing that he said in those remarks we're basically expanding that notion where you have this notion of a consumer utility token that's not considered a security, and this whole new construct, this whole new way that humans can get together for collective action. And again, it's this network business model. I encourage you to read the whole speech. It was pretty awesome. And they really do think that there is this new kind of architecture for business where you can sell a token, and if lots of people get together, lots of companies get together in different roles on these open platforms, and they create a platform that's valuable, emerges a set of services or products, and causes it to be used heavily, causes the demand for the token to outstrip whatever supply is configured for the token, then all the people holding that token are incentivized to add value to the system, and they will garner value from the system, importantly, by their own action, by working on the system and not investing money and relying on somebody else to increase the value of that stake for them.
And do you think that sort of formula is something that could be sort of cloned by other chains that are coming up in the next couple of years? That sort of utility focus.
Oh, sure. Ethereum is currently, I think I read 94% of tokens have been issued on Ethereum right now. Ethereum is by far the most expressive platform for building radically decentralized applications, and with the new advances in layer 2 mechanisms for scalability, it's a great place to build out these protocol-based open platforms. So we are seeing, at ConsenSys, we're building 30 of them. Many other companies in the space are building out that exact thing.
We've obviously heard a lot about crypto prices over the last 6 months, a lot of wealth being created, a lot of wealth being lost. But on the flip side to blockchain, there's a lot of around social good and a lot of sort of mission-oriented pieces to the blockchain. What are some of your favorite projects in that sort of category?
The social good space? So I consider roughly everything we do to be socially good. Just a thesis that essentially ConsenSys' mission is to build technology that enables the world to build better systems for itself, and also to build some of those better systems. And the thesis there is that decentralized architectures will enable the construction of better systems in many different niches. And some applications can usefully belong on a centralized architecture or a partially decentralized architecture, but generally moving towards more decentralized architecture will be better. So that said, there are projects where we are enabling the reporting of events in war zones where there are social impact bonds being created. We done one piece of work with the World Food Program where we're tracking essentially tuna, different kinds of tuna, from bait to plate. So where we essentially have an application that, just a mobile app that you can check from when the fish is actually caught and RFID'd to when it's landed, gets its documents, gets put on a plane, temperature's monitored, lands, gets transported. We actually served some of this tuna.
For those of you who were here
an event
earlier,
recently.
we had the supply chain discussion, and we said I think the average was about 5-7 years to get to this, but it sounds like we're already going from plate to table,
Yeah,
or from ocean to table.
Bait to plate.
Bait to plate. That's
Yeah, so the amazing thing about this use case, and it's a sort of test use case at this point, but and we have a project called Viant, a team that built a tool. It's an amazing piece of software, blockchain-based, for track and trace of elements in the supply chain. So if you have a supply chain and you're tracking things like the slave-freeness of a particular line of clothing, and if you track it all the way along that supply chain, and if you're able to, and it's hard work and it's dangerous work, because if you go into these situations and you certify that it's essentially a slave-free environment or child labor-free environment, that will cause people to react negatively, but that work needs to be done. Once that work is done, and you don't need it at every node of the supply chain initially, but once it starts to get into place, then in our software you can have a score of how slave-free, for instance, each node is in the supply chain. And if you have in some sort of consumer clothing store, if you have a measure of that on the shelf, you've got maybe two items of clothing that are substantially similar, and this one is 67% slave-free and this one's 77% slave-free. You can let the consumer's choices ramify, hopefully, along the supply chain. And,
so away from sort of the blockchain world and also ConsenSys, and just focusing on yourself, you're traveling around the world, you've sort of grown this company. How have you personally adapted? How have you sort of learned as you've grown with ConsenSys as well?
I'm really good at operating on not too much sleep these days. How have I adapted? So similar to how many people in our company have adapted, the amount of growth, the amount of incoming interest is pretty overwhelming, and we need to hire more people. We need to create better, more efficient systems. We need to reprioritize what we're doing. So I was involved in a lot of detail of nearly everything a year and a half ago, and there's just so little that I can get to at this point. And several of us have significant teams around us, just trying to stay organized and on top of things.
Project out, 4 or 5 years. You continue on this growth path. ConsenSys gets to 100,000 people, or what's sort of the scale that, in terms of the projects and the ecosystem, the community, the network, what does that look like 5 years out?
I have no idea. Bigger.
Bigger.
Yeah, so we've been growing organically. We are quite a flat organization with lots of autonomous groups. Our groups have the ability to spin out of ConsenSys when it makes sense. So we've had companies spin out, and we remain very close to those companies. Either we're meetings every 2 weeks at worst. And we do events together, and we set things up together where we're working together. So essentially, we are working towards taking our different groups and enabling them. We have a group called ConsenSys Labs that is helping them wrap themselves in APIs. And so whether that's a product group or a service circle like legal or HR or finance, if we get clean APIs around those things, and we have a project called Open Law, which enables us to create hybrid, legally enforceable blockchain-based agreements. So if we realize service-level agreements along on all those APIs, then we can have these different modular units that are advertising what they can do. So they advertise to the mesh of ConsenSys projects and companies, but they're also advertising to the world, and lots of our projects do serve non-ConsenSys projects. And so maybe it becomes essentially a much more open mesh where we've got our processes together so that there isn't a lot of bottlenecking in the system, and people are free to make their own best decisions where the situated awareness, intelligence, and data is, and it becomes essentially more of an open market set of projects that interoperate with one another and are open to interoperating with everybody.
Fantastic. Joe, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.